Story 1. My grandmother, who cannot send a text message, somehow traced her entire genealogy back to 17th century colonial America and then wrote a book large enough to use as an elevator counterweight. Story 2. My grandmother printed a video from YouTube. It was a promotional video from my uncle's architecture firm about one of their projects. She made about 100 frames, creating a small flip book using only screenshots, scissors, and patience. Story 3. My grandfather once made a spiral drive shaft out of scrap metal. His tractor had broken, and he did not want to go to the store and wait weeks for a new part. So he found a straight piece of iron and a piece of iron rebar and welded them together to make a perfectly fine piece. That was impressive. I wish I was good at welding. I assume this post is about older people struggling with computers. In the late 2000s, I was an information technology network administrator, and older employees would come into my office all the time after they had spent $1,000 or so to buy their first smartphone out of pocket. This was non-work sanctioned equipment and a total waste of my time, but I am a pretty nice and approachable person, so they would ask me for help. They did not understand how to use touch screens. It was infuriating and wasted a lot of my time until I found one easy trick. I would tell them to install the game Angry Birds, play it for 15 minutes a day, and then come back a week later. Every single person I made install and play Angry Birds actually learned how to use their brand new touchscreen phone and had no issues with it ever again. Story 4. My grandfather has been interested in computers from the beginning. Currently, the most remarkable thing he does is run a Linux computer with many unauthorized programs, all at 88 years old. Story 5. My grandmother thought her compact disc player was broken for an entire decade. When I eventually found this out, I looked inside and saw that the compact disc was placed upside down. Story 6. The battery was dying in the smoke detector, beeping as expected. She silenced it by hitting it off the wall with her cane. Story 7. When I was a kid, tape recorders were pretty new. My parents bought one for us and one for my grandparents who lived very far away. We recorded a message to send to the grandparents. Kids singing, telling about our day, "We love you, Grandma," and so on. They were supposed to record a message to send back to us. What we got was a recording of my sweet little grandmother saying, I'm not sure. What button do I push? How does this work?" And my grandfather saying, "This thing doesn't work. Throw it out the window." That's my lasting memory of my grandparents. Story 8. Believe everything they read online without any critical thought. They get most of their information and news from Facebook, and it has basically turned them into hard right-wing extremists. Story 9. It was old technology, but I think it still counts. I found out recently that my paternal grandfather was involved with the atomic bomb tests. He measured and calculated atmospheric and meteorological data as part of site identification and selection, as well as measurements and calculations after detonation. Coincidentally, he was also involved in the cleanup of the 2 undetonated nuclear bombs dropped in North Carolina. Story 10. My lovely grandmother used her microwave for one thing only: heating water. It was adorable. She also used email only once. Her message to me was, "Your father made me do this. I will never be the same again. Love, grandmother." Story 11. Had a scammer make them download AnyDesk. The person gained control and started installing more remote applications. Thankfully, Grandma called me in time. Story 12. My great-grandmother had a television show on the public broadcasting service teaching music to children. It was one of the first shows they had in Michigan on the public broadcasting service. Story 13. My mom cannot use a smartphone. She does not know how to send a text message. She taught herself structured query language because she wanted to create and maintain relational databases for the company she volunteers with. She does not understand why I get mad when she tells me she is doing thousands of hours of work for this company for free. She sees it as strictly volunteer work. Story 14. My dad told me that when they first got electricity on their farm in rural Poland, his mother made sure to plug something into every outlet to prevent electrical leakage. Story 15. Not even my grandparents, all of whom are still alive, have topped the list of making serious mistakes with technology. My mother takes the prize. She fell for the Geek Squad scam completely. She scratched off $2,500 worth of Apple gift cards and texted the codes overseas. I assume. This woman graduated with her master's degree a couple of weeks ago. What a scary thought. Story 16. My grandfather, who was born in 1917, was an amateur radio operator and achieved more with technology than many people today. Story 17. Not my relative, but my Vietnam War veteran girlfriend asked me to buy her $100 in Roblox gift cards and send them to an email. She said she would pay me back. It sounded like she was getting scammed. It turns out someone had been checking up on her in a nice romantic way for a few months. I told her it was a scam, but she was begging. I sent the gift cards, but Amazon denied the purchase. They called me and said that email was associated with a scammer. I told my friend it was a scam and sent her a screenshot from Amazon. She then told me to send $100 to him on Venmo. I did send it with buyer protection and marked it as fraud a few weeks later. Years later, she said she knew she was being scammed, but it was nice that someone was calling her every day to check if she was alive. Story 18. Grandmother used to pull her new car, a 1994 Dodge Spirit, up to the house and turn the washer nozzles to spray and clean the living room windows. Story 19. My grandfather in Canada owned Blue Top Brewery. He was exempt from rationing because the brewery was critical infrastructure. I guess it was that sweet 100-pound bag of sugar he kept in the closet. Story 20. Not my grandpa, but it reminds me of one time I bought some computer parts off Craigslist. This was about 2010. I showed up at the guy's place and he was a really old man, looked to be in his 70s. I made a comment about it being unusual, and he told me a bit of his history with computers. He said he used to work in a Radio Shack many years ago and taught himself the beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code computer language by reading a book they sold there. He took that and made an inventory database program for their store and several others in town. Funny thing is, I used to work at another store that used his program. He said most of the places had since upgraded, but a few places still used his program and would call him when they had issues. Needless to say, I was surprised and quite impressed. Story 21. Grandfather has a flip phone and a camera. His son buys him a slightly modern smartphone to replace both. Grandfather does not really want the new phone, so he accidentally drops it in the fish tank and goes back to his old phone and camera. Story 22. My 75-year-old mother got really into FaceTime with us. She is disabled and does not have her own cell phone, so she was using her caregiver's phone. The caregiver would always FaceTime us during her shift. Mom could make the call herself, but the buttons were quite small and she is not very dexterous. I bought Mom an iPad and set it up with large accessible buttons and text, placing the FaceTime icon in the middle of the home screen. Easy. She has never used it once, and since then, unless I call on the landline, I have only heard from her via email. She never checks her inbox, only sends outbound emails. Every time I visit, I see the expensive iPad sitting there, and she asks me to fill her in on all the news I sent her via email, which she did not read. Story 23. My dad, a grandparent, was driving to see us when he called me to say he thought his transmission was failing. I told him to stop and get it checked. He found a dealership that approved the vehicle at no charge and sent him on his way. It turned out he had accidentally shifted his car into manual mode without realizing the option existed, and he was driving on Interstate 95 in about third gear. Story 24. Built and maintained oil derricks that helped fuel the end of World War II. Designed and engineered the first legitimate stealth bomber using a slide rule, a pencil, and reams of crosshatched notepads. Constructed a three-way push-to-talk voice intercom system between the main house, the guest house, and the garage workshop using salvaged parts. The craziest thing witnessed was placing sealed glass jars of berries, applesauce, chicken, pineapple rings, or shredded barbecue beef into a pot, cranking a lid down onto the top as if it was ticking inside, then heating it until it was whistling and threatening to explode, while moving about nearby, cooking dinner as if nothing was wrong. That's dangerous. Full of glass shrapnel and boiling hot applesauce. When it starts to sound angry, stop cooking dinner and run. Story 25. My grandpa used to work at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and an Air Force base. During that time, he apparently met Grace Hopper, a computer engineer who discovered a literal computer bug in 1947 and let my mom playtest what may have eventually become Zork. Now, he plays computer bridge all day. When he is not playing bridge, he is being inappropriate, which means he has installed Raid Shadow Legends 5 times. I no longer interact with him due to multiple incidents involving new devices and tabs being left open. Story 26. Not my grandparent, but I once had an older teacher who would often show us YouTube clips as teaching examples. They would open Google Chrome, type in google.com, then Google YouTube, find YouTube under all the sponsored ads, and then search for the video on YouTube. They could have just typed in physics experiment YouTube directly into the Chrome address bar. Story 27. They were gifted an iPad for Christmas one year. When we visited, we asked about it, and they said it was in the barn out back because one night a video kept playing. They could not figure out how to turn the sound off and stop it, so they just put it in the barn. Story 28. My grandmother went so deep into conspiracy theories such as QAnon that she emerged completely rational. I suppose there is enough conflicting information on Facebook to make her question everything. Story 29. I don't know if this qualifies as crazy, and she wasn't my grandmother, but when I worked retail electronic sales, I sold a high-performance gaming computer to an 85-year-old woman who wanted to play World of Warcraft online with her grandsons. She came back a few times to buy accessories or to bring a friend to buy items from me, and she mentioned her progress in the game. I guess she became pretty good at it. Story 30. When my mother got her first mobile phone, she thought she should press the green phone icon first, which would then give her a dial tone. Story 31. I found several condoms in the glove compartment of my 74-year-old grandfather's Mazda Miata after he passed away. Does that count? Story 32. My grandmother had a job as a computer programmer and wrote some of the first banking software used in the 1990s. Although she had been retired for a while, she was brought on as a consultant to help upgrade the systems to prevent the year 2000 problem. Story 33. My grandmother posted her address and phone number on a fraudulent Facebook post asking for that information to bless them with a sum of cash. She then became upset when I told her to remove it because it was not real. Story 34. My grandma used to use the disc tray to hold her coffee cup. It broke one time, and she took it to the Geek Squad and said, "My cup holder broke." They informed her it is actually for CDs. Story 35. My family is pretty sure that my grandparents are haunting the 1980s stove in their house. It started when my grandmother passed away in 2018. The timer on the stove began going off around important dates, such as birthdays. The stove is basically not used except for storage, so there is no reason for the timer to go off. Then my grandfather passed away in February. My mother was at their house on what would have been his 90th birthday, and the timer started going off. Story 36. My grandparents are terrible with video calling in general. I always have to tell them to put the phone higher or lower, and I can't figure out why they always forget. One time I watched Iron Man 3 and got a quote from when Happy tried to video call Tony. "Is this the forehead of security?" I used the same quote when my grandpa got it wrong. "Is this the forehead of the insert family name family?" Story 37. An elderly aunt gave away over $1 million, almost all of her assets, to a Nigerian scammer thanks to Facebook. Story 38. My elderly aunt has given her card information to 3 gentlemen from India and 1 from Turkey. I think that is quite concerning. She is already on her 5th debit card, and I still see her responding to fraudulent Facebook scam posts. Story 39. I am going the opposite way here. I had a friend whose grandmother learned how to take screenshots on her iPad. She took screenshots of gifts for her children and grandchildren. Then she would print out the photos and put them in a binder so she would not lose them or forget. Story 40. My parents gifted my dad's mother one of those new coffee makers, a Mr. Coffee. The first time she used it, the coffee came out too weak, so she poured it back into the machine for a second brew. Story 41. Whenever a pop-up on my grandfather's browser appears asking for permission to do something, he automatically and uncritically clicks yes. I have had to remove the same software, which is not actually malware since he voluntarily added it, 3 times in the same day before. Story 42. It's not me personally, But my mom has to read the car manual to my grandma who has a 2022 or newer car because everything is digital. She does not know how to read her text messages on her old iPhone or set up voicemail because she would not know how to do it. Story 43. My grandfather got one of those farm windmills from the Department of Energy back in the early 1970s. He began experimenting and powered a chest freezer in the barn to store meats, and that worked all through the 1980s. He had some help building a second and third smaller windmill, which helped power the home. The craziest thing he did, which he called the potato method, was drawing power from trees in the yard. He sold a number of his ideas while the farm was completely powered until the early 1990s. His main struggle with selling a system was safety due to the vulnerability of trees in bad weather. Story 44. My grandfather was an eavesdropper in Papua New Guinea during World War II and was always tinkering with technology. He introduced me to gaming with Lemmings, Glider Pro, Nanosaurs, and Bugdom on his Macintosh. He managed all the technology systems for his church well into his 80s. The craziest thing he built? My aunt's house has a heated floor, and there was a fault somewhere in the wiring. The technician was going to tear up all the tiles to find the fault, so my grandfather made the 5-hour drive from Sydney to her house and built an electromagnetic sensor to detect where the fault was. He only needed to remove one tile and save them several $1,000s. Story 45. My grandfather helped design the centrifuges for uranium refining during the Manhattan Project. He was one of many people involved, but 2 cities were significantly affected, so this event seems quite remarkable. Story 46. This sounds fake, but I swear it is true. I went to my parents' place many years ago. There was a strip of paper across the top of my mother's computer. I asked her what it was all about. Turns out my mother was in Oprah Winfrey's book club. Oprah sent out an email with a link. The instructions said to copy and paste the link to the top of your browser. So my mother printed the email, took out her scissors, and taped the strip to the top of her monitor. Story 47. My grandmother, God rest her soul, taught her how to text using text-to-speech. She refused to mute the television, and my grandfather would shout random things to her as well, so every text she sent was a hoot to try and decipher. Here is a sample from her first few months. Okay, maybe that's right. Anyway, I hope this is all. It says delete. What the hell is that all about? Well, anyway, I'm gonna try this again. If this works this time, then I guess I'm just out of luck. Can't say that kind of stuff across. Is that out? That's good. Maybe it's working. Friday will work. You were okay. Now it says I can speak. I don't know what the first part of it says. I don't understand. But anyway, I'm giving it another try. I hate to keep pressing on you, but I don't know who else will quite understand what I'm doing. Okay, here I go. I hope this already too, honey. Hopefully, I can see it. She did get it figured out, and her texts near the end were much more understandable. Story 48. My maternal grandmother bought and learned to use a computer in the late 1990s to self-diagnose and plan her treatment for leukemia. She was correct in her diagnosis but died at a research-intensive university cancer center. Story 49. My grandfather moved into a retirement village in the late 1990s. He discovered they were still using an entirely paper-based filing system. He sat down with everyone in the office, conducted a requirements analysis, and then developed a Microsoft Access database for them to use instead. He later sold that database to 2 other retirement villages. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.